said that. And then earlier on in the conversation, it talks about interference of directors on a board. But directing is interfering. So they're in conflict, I think. Second of all, the Price Waterhouse, my friend at the Price Waterhouse talks about the audit committee. And he speaks of who the management should report to in a pseudo kind of way, to the board as well as to the audit committee. And that, again, I perceive as some kind of interference. And I believe in an ideal situation, I agree with you in terms of that conflict and in terms of that interference with directors. But a lot of these state companies are in problems right now, and financial problems. I think there are very, very few who are not necessarily in financial problems, either by subventions, subsidies, either by direct promises made by state, loans, those kinds of things. And it takes a certain type of management to bring you out of that situation, whether it's day-to-day, whether it's month-to-month, and it needs shaking up. And I think it will be wrong if a board of directors does not take it by the collar and shake it up to ensure that you have financial stability, which is what eventually the state requires.
Thank you, Mr. Gillett.
Totally agree. I've gone through this experience many, many times in my working life. With 20/20 hindsight, having gone through the experience, I think we have to follow something that I believe Philip said about determining, having an MOU, I think was the word he used, between yourself as the board of directors and the CEO. A mutually agreeable MOU. I'm in charge of this, you're in charge of this. And it was talked out and fleshed out, right? It is something that I saw on that website that I referred to, a thing that seems to me to make a lot of sense, that any part of the world, you have a bright CEO and you have a bright chairman, you're going to have conflict. So you've got to determine your boundaries, okay? And you've also in accordance with your strategic plan, you have got to determine your performance indicators for your CEO. This is always missing, in my view, right? Yeah. I want so-and-so, very specific and manageable outputs and outcomes. I want so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so within the next 6 months, within the next year, okay? And unless the CEO comes up, and he agrees to it, comes up with a out-of-the-box, what do you call it, hand of God thing that prevented him from achieving the objectives, he will know from in front that he has problems, he's not doing his job. So to me, I hear your point about shaking up, but you must also include the question of dialogue and management and understanding where each other stands.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I don't know, Mr. Ramirez, you would like to add anything? Sure, okay. Next question, please.
Okay, it may not necessarily be a question. Arlene McComey, Permanent Secretary, Local Government. Mr. Marshall spoke this morning about the boundary lines. And I think, well, even before I get there, I just want to commend the Ministry of Finance for putting this on, but I think more is required. These boundary lines seem to be a little blurred. We have been noticing, and it is not just, I'm not just talking about local government and my companies, because I'm hearing it from my colleagues and other persons. Subcommittees of the board are recruiting people. That is a definite stepping into the management and operations. And therefore, these boundary lines need to be made a whole lot clearer. And I think it has to be done, maybe at smaller fora, but with the assistance of the Ministry of Finance, because some of the boards are not, they don't seem to know where they're supposed to draw the line.
Thank you, Ms. McComey. We will note your observation. Thank you. Take the next question.
name is Yunus, Chairman in Audit Committee, National Commission for Self-Help Limited. We just need to get some clarification. I got the impression that there are two different perspectives concerning the function of the internal auditor in terms of his reporting, his or her reporting. I got the impression that there's a perspective that the internal auditor should report to the executive. And there's another perspective that the internal auditor must interrelate a report principle to the audit committee. I'm asking this because my understanding of the role of the internal auditor and having an audit committee is that the audit committee really is, if I were to use the corollary of a constitutional authority as we have it in the Republic, the internal auditor enjoys that function and reports, as you say, one of the commissions, Police Service Commission or the Public Service Commission, reports to the Parliament rather than to the political executive. And one wonders if that is not the preferred way, rather than have the internal auditor interrelating, subjecting to, and reporting to the, as it were, the political executive.
Mr. Ramirez?
Again, I'm just going from my personal experience. I've always had wonderful working relationships with my internal auditor. I like to have an auditor around me. I like to have a left-brain person who deals with my decisions, and if I'm wrong, alerts me from early in the game. And so I don't see it as an issue that he can report to the audit committee an issue that has to do with the governance of the company. You know, if I recall at Point Lisa's, there was a dotted line to the audit committee and a straight line to me, right? But the fact of the matter is that the audit committee could ask the internal auditor to do an investigation, investigating the CEO. All right? So I don't see a conflict, really. I mean, I've lived through this many years.
Mr. Ramirez, would you like to add?
Yeah, I agree with that comment, and I guess that's why I said during your presentation, I think it's something that really ought to be handled on a case-by-case basis. I think for where there are routine reviews being done by the internal auditor, there is probably no issue with reporting into the CEO. I think for good practice and to maintaining the independence and more, I guess, the perception of independence, it's good practice for the reports to be officially tabled at the audit committee. But, you know, it's not behind the CEO's back, so to speak. The CEO is fully in the know, has an opportunity to guide, to respond to issues. So I agree with Mr. Rawlingson that I don't see it as being an issue. And I think at the end of the day, common sense must prevail. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Thank you. Betty Ramnarine, Deputy Chair, National Commission for Self-Help. And like my colleague, Mr. Nurse, I'd like to thank the presenters for this morning's function, and by extension, the Ministry of Community Development. Currently, we are functioning with a tenders committee, and I'm noticing in the manual, there's no tenders committee. There's a finance and investment committee. Is this now the committee to review tenders? Thank you.
Just repeat the last part of your question, please. Sorry, we didn't get it.
There's a finance and investment committee.
Yes.
In the manual. Is this now the committee to review tenders? Because we have a tenders committee, and there's not a tenders committee in the manual. No mention is made of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Nurse?
Yeah. This committee is a separate committee, and if you look on page 140 of the performance, appendix K of the performance appraisal report, we have made provision for a finance and investment committee as well as a tenders committee and an audit committee. So there are three specific committees.
But I think it should be understood that the two statutory committees of a board, one is the tenders committee, next one is the audit committee. That's the checks and balances that we're talking about. So every board is supposed to have a tenders committee and supposed to have an audit committee. it's also in the Companies Act where it says shall, that the board of directors shall have a tenders committee, or shall have, sorry, auditors committee. So it's in the manual, but it's part of your remit.
Okay, we'll take the next question.
Good morning. Margaret Parks, Lake Asphalt, Audit Committee. My question is, am I to understand that Mr. Ramirez in his presentation indicated that the Audit Committee should meet with the external auditors during the course of the audit or after? I'm saying that because sometimes the auditors, they come in and they disappear, and you never hear from them, or you're left to get the information from the finance or the internal auditor. I want to know how you think that should play out. I have one other question, and then I'll sit down. The question of an executive board and a non-executive board. What is the difference, and how do we, as state enterprise boards, function? I believe that we are non-executive boards, but as the lady from local government indicated, there's a little bit of confusion there.
Okay, we'll answer the first question that Mr. Ramirez will address, and I think Mr. Nurse will answer the second part of your question. Thank you. Mr. Ramirez.
Thank you for the question. In a slightly cynical way, I guess if you haven't heard from the external auditors, that should be good news, right? But joking aside, I think it comes down to the, when I spoke about meeting with the external auditor up front to agree on the relationship that you ought to have, and the structure, frequency, and format of interface and reporting. So I think it would be a good idea for the audit committees to, if it's not a set practice, to ask the external auditors to meet with them up front at the pre-engagement or planning stage to determine what an appropriate mechanism would be for interfacing with the audit committee, and they can then agree on what is best for that situation. All right, where there are shorter audits, it may not be a need for more meetings, and maybe twice, one at the beginning, one at the end. Where there are audits that take place maybe over a period of 6 months or more, there may be a need to set up a schedule of meetings at an appropriate stage of the audit, but all the while remaining a level of flexibility as issues turn up and require meetings that were not originally scheduled. All right, so I think that it's very important to agree up front how that interaction should work, but with a level of flexibility that you can change as issues come up.
Mr. Ramirez. Mr. Lewis?
Yeah, the question of executive and non-executive directors, your letter of appointment would have indicated whether an executive director would be somebody who is appointed a director by the government and given like a executive chairman, for example. But as far as I'm aware, most of the directors are all appointed as non-executive directors, where they have to work through the CEO. And that's why Mr. Marshall made the point about Alex Ferguson standing on the sidelines of a football match, because it's simple that they are not executive directors, and they're only entitled to their stipend. Your stipend is a complete remuneration for all the work that you do as a non-executive director. So there's no privileges attached. You're a non-executive director, you have a role to play, and the executives deliver your operations. That's how it's designed.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, sir?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is William Cunningham, and I am a member of the YTEP board. I shall like to preface my question by indicating that due to the challenge of traffic, I arrived while Mr. Marshall was on his feet. So I got to the tail end of his presentation. However, the little that I gathered from his presentation seemed to suggest that there is a line of demarcation between the management and the board of directors. And I think I heard him saying that the board of directors, you know, they function, well, in my interpretation, I got a sense that the function of the board of directors, you know, is a bit minimal, and the management is the one that sort of formulates, that's the word I was looking for, formulate the policies and implement them. Now, that's the impression I got. No, I need clarity on that. Now, as it relates to, now, later on in the Q&A, Mr. Neil Rawlinson, in response to Mr. Gillett's question, seemed to indicate that there should be some kind of MOU between the CEO and the chairperson of the board relative to roles and responsibilities, which conveys the idea that those roles are not codified. They are a bit blurred or even nebulous. In those circumstances, I would think that there should be a clear line or a clear directional focus in respect of the rules. Furthermore, there should be a clear direction relative to the pecking order, or if you like, the hierarchy. So I am unclear in respect of the role of the board of directors vis-a-vis the function of the management. I think it's a little blurry there. While it may not be codified, I think it may be useful so that one can know precisely what one has to do, and in those circumstances, elements of conflicts will be reduced. And as I take my seat, one has to be mindful that intersecting boards and management structure is the whole reality of the overarching political reality. That cannot be swept under the carpet.
Okay, take your point.
It must be acknowledged.
Okay, we take your point. Mr. Rawlinson?
Thank you.
What can I say? I can only go, Mr. Cunningham, is it? I can only go by my own personal experience. I've served under 4 or 5 boards at Point Lisas. I've served under private sector boards in the private sector. In each one of those circumstances, there have been different requirements of the board in terms of moving forward. My job in all of those cases was to move the thing forward, right? So that we had an undeclared MOU as to what the chairman and the board would deal with and what the CEO would deal with, okay? All I've said in my presentation is better to put it in writing so everybody knows what's going on. But you cannot have, as somebody mentioned earlier, Philip mentioned the question of the Alex Ferguson approach and the sideline. The point of the matter, in running a company, there's no such thing as a clear role for the board. The board has its work to do, very ably fleshed out this morning. The management has its role to do, but when they meet, there are going to be gray, you call it nebulous. There are going to be nebulous areas where you have got to have an understanding of how the thing goes on. That's my own personal experience.
I wish to crave your indulgence.
Sure.
As I mentioned the word political over reality, you declared your understanding of what I'm saying. Therefore, I was left high and dry.
Okay, I do apologize. Please continue.
It's accepted kindly.
Thank you.
Now, when I said the political reality, I was just simply being forthright by acknowledging that every board member here, everyone, was politically appointed, myself included. Okay?
It wasn't taken in any way.
Well, I did not have the privilege to conclude. And I feel that, well, so I was just saying the political reality, and we must balance all these three variables so that we can come to an amicable solution.
Thank you very much, sir. Comments are welcome. Just take 2 more questions.
Well, I will be very brief. I just want to ask 2 questions. As you know, board members, directors, Brian Big is my name, Director of Seafood Industry Development Company. Besides meeting once a month, sometimes board of directors on subcommittees meet more than once a month. And I would like to ask, in what way, now our bylaws shows this, on the issue of remunerations, besides our stipend and traveling, is there in any way that board members can receive another allowance, and the fact that when you sit on committees, and they have to meet more than once a month? And second question, on the issue of the e-auction, well, Mr. Figaro, you tweaked my mind with this. From how I understand it, is it that you do it via online instead of having to tender by hand? And if this is so, how corruption-free can this be? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You'll answer the first question, Ms. Ramprasad.
Yes,
allowances.
on page 19 of the manual.
Page 19 of the manual.
Fees and allowances
And
shall
fees
be
and allowances.
full compensation paid to board members in consideration for services on the board and any subcommittees of the board. So these fees that we have outlined on page 18, that is full compensation, including serving on subcommittees. With respect to representatives who come in from Tobago, or if there's a board meeting in Tobago and a Trinidad representative has to travel to Tobago, they should be paid a reasonable allowance to facilitate the travel. All reasonable costs associated with attendance at the board meetings of persons appointed as Tobago representatives who are required to travel to Trinidad should be met by the company. The same applies to Trinidad representatives appointed to boards based in Tobago.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ramprasad. Mr. Figaro, on the auction?
Yes. But the question with the auction in terms of the paperless type of arrangement, actually it's much more transparent because it's all online. So all the questions are being done online within a group and everybody understands what the questions are. When you go on the paper-based type of arrangement, what you normally would get would be, remember your advertising in the papers, which comes up to about approximately, depending on the size of the contract, about $30,000 easily. And then there's a timeline. And once you have to then put in the box and who reaches late, and it becomes an issue. Now it's just straight electronic. All the questions are answered online, and it's being done live online. And we haven't had any issues in terms of the integrity of the process. It's a very secure network and a very secure line. So, to answer your question.
Okay, final 2 questions.
Good day. Stephen McCarthy is the name from Exim Bank, the Export-Import Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. This is more an observation that I believe that the role of the regulatory bodies, supervisory bodies, there could be a change in enhancing the governance process there to protect the public and the company maybe from itself. And this could include, apart from the Integrity Commission, for example, the SEC, Securities and Industries Commission, the Central Bank, the Registrar General, Inland Revenue. And my view is that the current pure relationship between the regulator and the regulated entity must consider the underlying customer of the firm on an ongoing basis, not only when the firm is in difficulty or public difficulty or when the firm fails. Because in the absence of information to the contrary, the public assumes that the company is conforming to all established requirements. So it shouldn't be that after everything is falling apart, then we are hearing that certain things are not in place. So on the Integrity Commission, while it may not now be law, somewhere the firm where the directors, well, this is in the case of public companies, where the directors have to submit certain information. If it is not submitted, we shouldn't have to wait a year or 2 years after to see somebody's name, you know. And similarly with, I think like on central bank side, it should be a matter that if somebody is not authorized to conduct a certain type of business, the public should know about it. It shouldn't be that you're just dealing with the company on a one-on-one basis, and then later on, you know, the public finds out, you know, which I think is unfortunate. In some of these instances, it is likely that the law would have to be changed. But of course, there will have to be some kind of reasonable dialogue to see that, you know, that people are, you know, they are not being abused through some little loophole or so, you know. But that is, it's just an observation, and thank you.
Thank you, I welcome that observation. Final question?
Yes, my name is Keswaj Sigobe in Ministry of Finance. I've been wrestling with Mr. Marshall's concept of outcome evaluation rather than output evaluation. And my conclusion is that he is taking us from a more direct and precise measurement to an area where the measurement becomes indirect and influenced by other factors. For example, in measuring outcomes, you could have other factors impacting, environmental factors as well as other factors. And it becomes, the measurement then becomes, while you're drilling down deeper, the measurement becomes, okay, you're calling for a survey. In measuring any outcome, you are asking for a survey to be done, where you now have to eliminate the impact of other factors. So I'm saying it becomes a little vaguer, if you want to call it that, you know that. Whereas to measure output, it is something direct, and I can measure whether you deliver 10 items or 8. And I've been wrestling with that for a while, and this is the conclusion I'm coming to, that we are going away from direct measurement to an indirect and vague method. Thank you.
Okay.
I do have Mr. Marshall is here,
Yeah.
but I think the intention is really to tie, to relate the output to outcomes. For example, several outcomes have been identified by the People's Partnership Government in their manifesto. There are 6 interconnected pillars to achieve sustainable development. So if, for example, your output is increasing revenues or dividend payments, it should, for example, as an outcome, it could be by way of financing or dividends to improve the socioeconomic status of people, you know. So it's really, the intention is really to tie the output and to tie it into an outcome.
Yeah, and it also goes back to the project management point I was making, that in project management, outcomes is what we look for. Outputs could be build a building. Outcome is nobody can live in it because it has no sewage. So in other words, the investment would have been lost. And if you look at some of the criticisms that have been made of some of our projects, for example, the stadium in Taruba, output $1 billion, outcome, can't use it yet. So in other words, we can't afford not to link outputs with outcomes. And the state enterprise, for example, you have special purpose state enterprises like NIDCO, right, who are building highways. You have other special purpose enterprises doing particular type of projects. And I'm saying, if they don't link their output to an outcome, output, dismantling of a bridge, outcome, health and safety issue, somebody got injured and somebody died. So that Mr. Marshall's position on linking output to outcomes is a critical, and it's not a change in the measure. It is actually enforcing the measure that asks you to look at not just what you do today, but what is the result, or what's the outcome it has and the impact it has on the national community and quality of life of our citizens. That's the bottom line.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nurse. And thank you very much to the audience for all the questions, as been noted. Just one comment, ma'am, Ms. Rampersad. Yes?
This is a large forum, but we have breakout sessions at the Ministry of Finance. So I took Mr. Pokomi's point that what we're doing here is not enough, and we need to have smaller sessions. So if you communicate your requests to the officers that interrelate with you, we will facilitate other breakout sessions at the ministry's head office. We have done it in the past, and we intend to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, thank you for our panelists on the head table. Our final item on today's program, it's a vote of thanks, and this will be done by Mr. Terence Bhagwan Singh, Investment Analyst at the Investment Division, Ministry of Finance.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished panel of presenters, permanent secretaries, chairmen, directors of boards of state enterprises, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ministry of Finance, I'm very proud to have the pleasure to extend warmest thanks and acknowledge all those who contributed to the successful hosting of our seminar today on corporate governance. Let me first thank the Hilton Hotel and their courteous staff for their warm hospitality in hosting a state enterprise sector here today. As is expected, the service was of the highest standard that we have grown accustomed to. To the presenters, the foundation for today's theme, I must say, was warmly introduced by the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Ms. Marlene Juman, who welcomed the audience and introduced the day's proceedings. The feature address presented by the Honorable Minister of Finance, Mr. Winston Dukaran, was on point, delivering the message on the importance of focusing on good corporate governance and accountability in the state sector. In the same tone, Mr. Philip Marshall then outlined the roles and functions of the directors of state boards and emphasized on the CEO to board relationship and developing strategies that create competitive advantages. After the break, we were introduced to the State Enterprise Performance Monitoring Manual 2001 version by Mrs. Gail Rampersad, Director of Research at the Investments Division of the Ministry of Finance, who glossed over the important areas of responsibility that all directors are encouraged to study well. Our next presentation came from Mr. Sean Ramirez of PricewaterhouseCoopers with a very insightful presentation on the role and function of the audit committees of the boards of state enterprises. Mr. Ramirez stressed on the need to be mindful of the oversight responsibility for financial reporting. A very informative contribution, especially with the setting up of the audit committee all the way to selecting the right fit. Mr. Louis Nurse, the project management protocol presenter, spoke about the need to pay particular attention to conceptualizing and designing projects. Also, site selection in the site selection with appropriate approvals was also important to consider. Mr. Leslie Figaro, procurement e-auction presentation, very strong presentation and illustration of the e-auction live example which we got this morning. Excellent delivery. The next presenter, Mr. Neil Rongerson, a member of the Integrity Commission, delivered a quite comprehensive overview on the requirements of the Integrity in Public Life Act on conflicts of interest. He brought to us what the law requires and the obligation of directors. In addition, Mr. Rongerson gave us all some homework to read the Companies Act, the bylaws of our companies, as well as the Integrity in Public Life Act. In summary, to all presenters, I would like to express on behalf of the ministry our sincere thanks for your time and effort here today for the valuable information gleaned from these presentations. I must also acknowledge the press and the media for your coverage, as well as bar groups for the technical support. the Investment Division, Ministry of Finance, we acknowledge the sterling contribution by the staff for compiling the material and coordinating this event here today. Your efforts are truly appreciated. Finally, I'd like to thank you, the members of the state enterprises, for participating in our corporate governance seminar. I trust that the information was valuable to you, and feel free to contact us at the Ministry of Finance for any information that you may require. Thank you.
Thank you, Terence. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of today's program on corporate governance. We thank you for your participation, and of course, we look forward to any feedback you may have. Well, lunch is served. What